Hi, welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Sid Marsh. And tonight we have two lovely ladies with us, and they're going to discuss the lighter side of death. We have Sarah Lunsford and Tammy Beilstien.
Hi,
Welcome.
Sid.
Hi, Sid.
Okay, well, let's get right into it.
Jump into death.
Just dive right in.
Well,
yes.
first off, let's get a little background on both of you so we know you know something about death, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to start with me?
We'll start with Tammy.
Well, I've known about death since day one.
Since you were born.
Yeah, literally day one for me. My family has been in the mortuary business forever, generations of funeral directors and embalmers. So that was my plan as a little girl, was to grow up and be a mortician. And I always say this, people would ask me when I was a kid, what do you want to do when you get older? And I'd say, I want to be a mortician and an actress.
A double threat.
right. So I grew up around death, and at the mortuary, obviously, we would have families coming in and out, people in grief, making funeral plans, things like that. So I was always around it. It wasn't anything unusual to me, and I kind of thought that every family was like mine, and everybody talked about death all the time. And so it's never been anything that I shied away from or was uncomfortable
I always
around.
love the story you told me about you knew you were a big girl when you could look
Yeah.
over the embalming table.
Because when I was this big, and I'd see that someone being embalmed on the table, and their feet are like this. There was a while where I could just see their toes because I'd be looking up. I'd see the top of the toes, and then I got a little bigger. I could see more of their foot, and yes, I knew I was a big girl when I could see the entire body touching the embalming table. And I went around telling everybody in the neighborhood, and I got the weirdest looks from
I bet.
from parents. I think they're kind of like, you don't need to play with that girl. Yeah, she's weird.
Okay, well, we know that you have some serious
Issues.
issues. But how about,
And now I work for Hospice. I transitioned
we're
from.
going to get into
Okay,
that.
yeah.
Yes, so she works for Hospice.
Yes.
And I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. And how Tammy and I got involved with sort of death positivity is what I found out what the term is.
That's a real term now.
That's a
It's a real
real
thing.
term.
We didn't just make that up.
We didn't just make it up. Death amnesia I made up, but not death
Death
positivity.
amnesia.
But what happened was I was at a writer's conference, and I was sitting next to an agent, and we were talking, and she asked me about writing a book about caring for people as they die at home, because a lot of people actually die in hospitals or care homes, but most people want to die at home. So it's like 70% of people die in facilities, whereas 70% of people want to die at home. So we were talking about this book, but she said, you're a writer, you're not an expert in that field. She said, do you have a friend who's an expert in that field? And I said, why, yes, I do. My death friend.
Your death.
Yeah.
So that's how all of this started, and we started doing video blogs about different death topics.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about your blogs and your Facebook page and that sort of thing.
So we have a Facebook page. It's called Let's Talk About Death with Tammy and Sarah.
With
Or
Tammy
is it Sarah and Tammy?
It's Tammy and Sarah.
Okay. Yeah. But it's Let's Talk About Death. And we just put ourselves out there. Whatever question or topic or anything anybody has, they can ask us about it, post about it, whatever, and we'll talk about it.
What are some of the things they've asked you?
Oh, gosh. Things like getting along with family members when someone needs to be cared for at home. And different family members have different ideas of how that should happen. And sometimes it causes issues like this.
Yeah.
All sorts of things.
All sorts of things.
Yeah.
Makeup. Makeup questions come up. It's just
Sounds
that
like the Emily Post of death.
Right?
Yeah, there's so many things. Tammy knows all about kind of everything death-like. I mean,
The technical side.
The technical side. I mean, you
Or a
know
little
about
about
the
a
little,
lot.
like
Yeah.
the eyeball holders, and I mean these weird little
The
things.
caps,
The
yeah.
caps. I call them eyeball. She has the technical name, but there's all these little things that nobody really thinks about that are involved with. Actually, after someone dies, you know, how they're cared for. Do they have to be cremated? Do they have to be embalmed? What are sort of the technical restrictions? Every state is different. Every
So
county
you guys
seems
know
to
the
be
legal
different.
ramifications
we know
and all
some
that?
of
Some.
it.
What we don't know, we will find out, and then we'll go and we'll film our little,
Yeah.
our short video blog about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we know a little about a lot of different
Yes.
subjects, enough to where if we are out someplace, like at an event or something, and someone has a question, we know enough that we can give a good answer and hopefully satisfy what they wanted to know. But a lot of people do have questions about the actual, like what happens in the embalming room, what kind of things go on behind the scenes, that kind of stuff. So-
Exactly.
Now, where can
So-
folks find your blogs?
Well, we have our website. It's called Let's Talk About Death.xyz. It's not a .com, it's a .xyz.
Oh, okay.
And then they can find them on our Facebook page, which is Let's Talk About Death. And we do have an Instagram page, but I haven't added to it very much, so
I don't know how to do it. You do it.
I do that. Yeah, I do
Sarah's good at
Instagram.
that.
I do Instagram, she does Facebook, and it's sort of all sorts of, it sort of melds together, so
Now,
it
you
works out
mentioned you
well.
had an event that you did, a death
Yeah,
event.
we did. Oh my gosh, I had a mind blank. It was called
Before I Die.
Before I Die. It took place over at the San Andreas Chapel, the mortuary there. The same family owns the mortuary in Angels Camp and in San Andreas. And they held this one at the San Andreas mortuary. I hope they do it next year and hold it in Angels Camp, kind of go back and forth.
Go back and forth, yeah.
But it was really neat. They had this chalkboard out in front of the mortuary for a couple of weeks, I think, where people could go by. On the top, it said "Before I Die," and people could go and write on it.
I want to do such and such.
Yeah,
or,
I want to do
like
this.
a
I
bucket
want
Kind of their
list. or-
bucket
a
list.
bucket list, but you could see everyone else's comments on there, and I thought it was really cool.
It was a great idea.
And then they had various speakers come and talk throughout the day. It was held on a Sunday, and I think the speakers are maybe like a half hour each
Yeah,
or
they
so.
talked about the kind of the legal aspects of, you know,
Yeah.
what to prepare for, what you should have, what are living wills, what are the trusts. I mean, all these, there's so much now that can be tailor fitted to each person that you really need to go and explore what you want done with your stuff when you die, but not only what you want done with your stuff, but what you want done with your body too.
So who should people go to? People like you, a death counselor, or their attorney, or
For
a doctor?
the legal
or,
things,
For the legal,
they
it's
should
an
go to an attorney.
attorney.
You can get a lot of the forms online, so that's a good place to start. But if you have an attorney, I would say go to an attorney and have it done the right way. And then there's certain things that need to be signed by a doctor. Your doctor has to sign it, like a post
Yeah.
form and that kind of thing. So people should definitely ask about it. I have some
Or
of
the
them,
do
not
yeah.
all of them.
Or the do not resuscitate.
Yeah, the
That's a big
DNR.
one.
That's a very big one, yes.
you
And
need
everybody
to,
should.
Yeah, and you need to turn it into the hospitals that you might go to as well, or just have somebody keep it on them so that they can give it to the EMT people too, because their whole purpose is to resuscitate you and keep you living.
Right.
That's what the typical medical ethos is keep somebody alive. But if you don't want to be kept alive,
Right.
you need to make sure, very sure, that they know that. Because, I mean, you hear stories all the time about people who are brought back and they're like, ugh.
Yeah, like thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I kind of wanted to stay where I was. Yeah, so.
Maybe you should have a checklist on your website of the things you have to do
We
to prepare.
should do that. Yeah, I think at one point we had a post about it, but we should make it so it's a permanent thing,
Yeah,
so people
probably
can go
pin
there.
it to
They
the
can
top
just
of
check
our
it out.
page.
Yeah.
Now, would you be open for counseling if somebody wanted to, can you help me prepare for death or whatever?
We could help.
We could
Yeah.
help. We
I mean,
could
they're
also.
asking you questions on your blog,
Yeah.
same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or
We
just
could.
look at my blog or your blog
Right.
and see what's going on.
Yeah, we could
Yeah, we
definitely
could do that.
Yeah.
Or we could at least get them to where they need to be. Like
Yeah.
at the Before I Die event, actually Tammy has a show here on public access too.
You can give her a plug.
Yes, called Tammy's Window on Calaveras. And she had a Medicare expert on, and she said that one of her clients had actually gone to the Before I Die event, found out what needed to be done, and came to her and said, what do I need to do to make sure these things happen, as I age and as I, get closer to death. So there are certain things that need to be done. It's just that when you go to an event like that, you find out what they are, or you ask people, or go to, they have the death cafes. We were talking about that before we started filming, and those are hugely popular.
Explain what that is.
So I'll have Tammy explain it.
Well, they started in, I believe it was in England where they began, and it actually does take place in a cafe. People would gather for the purpose of talking about death, and it was super casual. They would be served cake and little cupcakes and things, and coffee and tea, and they're there to talk about death, and in a non-scary place where
In a
people are
comfortable
comfortable.
environment.
Yeah, and so that they came over here. People do have them here. They're not all that common, though. I would love it. Our hospice has been talking about doing something like that, and I hope that happens because I think it's really important. So there are some called death cafes. Some people do them when they call them death over dinner.
Death over
Over dinner.
Not because of dinner.
Right?
Let's hope not.
And it's just what you would think. Instead of being in a cafe where you're having cakes, you're actually at a table where you're having dinner, and you know that the conversation is all going to be death related. Which I told these guys, it's like growing up at my house. So we had death over dinner every night.
Tammy's family.
Yeah, my
Tammy's family dinner.
Yeah, right. But I think it's so important for people to talk about this just in a casual way. It's going to happen to every single one of us.
Exactly.
And it's nothing to be afraid of.
What was the Before I Die event? Was that well attended?
It was pretty well attended.
For the first time, I think it was well
was.
attended. Yeah. And they did some neat things. They opened up like the back room there, the embalming room, so people could take a tour and actually see what it looks like, because people's imaginations are
Yeah.
What do you think
so
about
much
the scary
scarier.
movies and
Yes,
things like
exactly.
that, right?
Right, and they could see that it, how they keep it, what it looks like, and ask their questions while they were there. Take out the mystery and the scariness of it. And,
Exactly.
just face it, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do.
Well,
And
what do
they do, like with our mortuaries here, they do offer, if you call up and want to take a tour of the mortuary, you can call up and, they'll meet you and, take you through. And it's always good to get ahead of something like this, because if someone dies and they don't have very much prepared, the family doesn't quite know what to do. And usually one person kind of spearheads everything. But if you have a family that everybody doesn't fall in line, it causes some, how do I say, nicely put disagreements.
Yes. I was present when my best friend died, and the family literally had to open up the yellow pages and start looking for mortuaries and things like that.
Really?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're right. Be prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you see with the future with your team, this deadly duo?
Yeah, well, we've talked about I like that.
So
That's
cool.
a good one. Deadly duo. I like that. We have to get costumes for that one.
We talked about that before. Her nicknames. I used to be, my parents nicknamed me Mo as a little girl because of the Three Stooges, and I was the oldest and I was the bossiest. But everybody else
I hope you didn't have the haircut.
Everybody
else assumed my nickname was Mo, short for Morticia. So we need to get her a name.
Yeah, I don't have a nickname yet. But what we're thinking about is actually expanding to podcasting. So that way we take out the video component, we can do it online. And as you can see, we interact the same on the phone, online, everywhere the same.
Yeah, we're just us.
So we're thinking about continuing with the podcast. And actually, we were talking about actually putting together a book of people's experiences with death. Instead of sort of a caretaking book, more, my best friend died, and this is how I felt about it. And this is how he passed. Those types of stories, because it actually, by presenting those stories to people, they realize it's a normal part of life. And it's I mean, it can be frightening, and a lot of people are frightened of it, but I always feel like the more you know about something, it takes a little bit of that edge off.
Yeah, but if I don't talk about it, it won't happen.
Right.
Exactly.
That's
That's
put
the
your head in the sand,
catch-22.
yeah.
Yes.
I'd like us to go and do some children's books
Yes.
about death.
Yeah, we've talked
Okay.
about that
Yeah.
too.
You need a good
So-
illustrator.
We would need a
Yeah.
good illustrator. I think that would be, I think it's needed. And
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to find a children's death section at the bookstore, right? So
Yes, it is. It is.
So we need books like that.
Well, tell us more about the hospice. You do this grief counselors, grief busters.
Yeah, Grief Busters, you're
for
right.
the kids.
Yeah, so I am the coordinator of that, and I train the volunteers we work with children ages 5 through 19 who are grieving the death of someone they love. And what's really awesome, what hospice has done, is we have opened that up to any young person in grief, not just children or grandchildren of hospice patients. It's open to anybody who needs it. And right now, I think we're at 31 kids that we're seeing. It's a busy program, and there's nothing else like it. We get calls from other counties asking if we'll come there to help their children, or a parent will call and say, can I bring my child to Calaveras and have someone meet them there? And I have to say no, just because our volunteers are already stretched so thin with the kids that we have committed to see. But it's free, and we see them for about 6 weeks or so at a time, depending on what they need. Some kids need much longer, and obviously we will do that. But
what do you see
I
the
love it.
difference between handling grief for an adult and handling grief for a kid? I mean, that's got to be a big difference.
It's a big difference, and one of the
And what do
ones
you
that
do?
pops to mind first is the difference in the way that children grieve compared to adults. Is kids might be able to handle grief for a few minutes at a time. You can tell them what has happened. They will hear you and maybe take it in and think about it for a few minutes, and then they're outside playing. And I hear this from parents all the time, like, I don't think they understood what I said, or I don't think they're very upset because they went outside and acted like nothing happened. But their brains are set up differently than
Yes.
ours, are not as mature as ours, obviously.
They're processing
They
it. or-
process
yeah.
differently.
They can take a few minutes at a time, but they can't just sit in grief like we can. I mean, adults can be sitting in grief for years, you
Yes.
know.
Which is
But
bad.
yeah,
I mean, you're trying to get them through the grief.
right. But with kids, they can't take so much of it at once, and so it looks like they don't care, but really it's just the way they handle it, which is probably a pretty darn healthy way. You know, they do what needs to be done. They go off, get a little break. They come back, think about it again when they're ready.
What are some interesting things you've seen kids do, how they handle the grief?
Oh, gosh. They do so many neat things. And a lot of it is our volunteer leads them to different ways that they handle grief. Usually with the boys, younger boys, anger is a feeling that they notice the most, that they have the hardest time with. And it might be sadness, it might be fear, it might be something different, but it comes out looking like anger. So a lot of times we will teach them how to handle their anger. We get like these squishy balls that they can throw against the wall as hard as they want to, or have them scream into a pillow as loud as they can until they just can't scream anymore, or things like that. Music is a good way for young people to get in touch with their grief and work through it, especially the teenagers with music.
Well, you're saying you wanted to do a book. What would be the message you're trying to get across to the kids?
I think one of the things I would like to see in a book are just the basics of what it means. A lot of very, very young kids don't understand what it means to be dead. That death means that person has stopped breathing, they've died, they're done with their body. Their body was just a shell, and their soul has left,
And there's
but
no
they're not
do-over.
coming back.
They're not
Yeah,
coming
they're
back,
not coming back. Because there's something else. A lot of times I'll be talking to one of the kids, or a volunteer will be, and they'll say, oh, you know, your grandpa has died, tell me about him. They'll tell about him. It seems they understand about the death, but then they're like, I wonder when I'm going to see him again. He might be back this Christmas. And you're like, oh, these don't understand. They don't have enough life experience to understand
The
what has
finality of it
happened.
all.
Yeah. So I think that they need some more, just gentle ways to explain the truth about what has happened.
Do you see any events, planning events for kids, that just like you're doing for the adults?
We, with our grief group for kids, we meet them one-on-one with the kids. We, for a short time, had a group meet at a school because there were maybe, I forget if it was 6 or 8 kids at one school that were in grief. And it was too many for our volunteers to meet with them one-on-one, so we tried a little group. And it was okay, but it didn't work the way I'd hoped it would, just because of the range and their age.
There's differences.
Their ages. And that there's a big difference from the way a 6-year-old handles grief and a 12-year-old handles grief, So, so it didn't work quite the way I'd hoped it would. And there are some places where they'll have campouts, weekends away, or big gatherings of a lot of kids who get together who are all in grief, and it's a neat way that they can support each other. But I honestly don't see us doing that.
Do you get involved with the kids before the family member dies,
We
or
do
is this
sometimes.
after the fact?
If they're on hospice, and we learned that there are children or grandchildren that are going through this with the family, then we do work with them. It's called anticipatory grief. And we set them up with a volunteer who helps explain to them what is happening right now and what is coming. And it's really an awesome way to do this, because then at the moment when this happens, they already have a connection with somebody. And they can just continue their talks with this person. And it's so helpful because their own family is usually in deep grief also.
Right. They have to take care of themselves.
Right. And the kids, they get these messages like, oh, I don't want to bring it up to my mommy because she starts to cry as soon as we mention it, so I'm not going to say anything. But they meet with their grief buster, and it's just blah. They let it all out because they can with their volunteer.
And we did, in one of the video blogs we talked about children and how a lot of times adults want to shield them from the process of dying. And so what happens is all of a sudden somebody's gone and there's no introduction, there's no build up to it. They didn't realize, maybe grandpa was sick. And we were just talking about how it's important to include your children in the process so that they're part of it. They're not just kind of hung out to dry.
Yeah, I love the idea of involving kids in the funeral planning and all of that. I mean, I think it's really important, and it makes it not so scary when they are participating in it. It's also why I like home funerals, where people keep the body at home for a while after they've died. So is
that very common?
It's becoming more
common. Is
common.
It more common?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny because it used to be the way things were done. Sarah's brilliant. I always say that anything that takes any brains out of between the two of us, she's doing it. But so Sarah knows all about.
You'll back her up.
The Victorian
knows
death
about the
rituals,
history.
That type of thing. Yeah, it's interesting because it was all done at home back in the 1800s up until, I think it was really the age of hospitalization that really kind of was the impetus for people to go to the hospitals to die instead of dying at home. So
separation.
It started this big separation, and now people go to hospitals to die, and so you don't get that whole process of that life cycle that they're dying at home.
Saying goodbye. They're in familiar circumstances with familiar people, and it's just the way that things have separated. And now it seems like, people are trying to go back to having their death at home instead of going into a facility. And there's probably a whole ritual or whatever or thing that you need to do at home to be ready.
To keep the body at home.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to do that. A lot of people don't think they're allowed to do that.
Yes.
Really?
It's absolutely
I
legal.
wouldn't think so,
Yeah. You don't have to have any services in a mortuary. You don't have to be embalmed. You can do most everything at home. The good thing about our mortuaries here is that the guys are so awesome. They have said that if we have a family, if someone wants to do a home funeral and there's paperwork that needs to be done, they will help take care of the paperwork, and the family can still keep the body at home. And they'll work with them if that's what they choose to do.
That is unusual, though.
That's not promoted very much. I mean, nobody would
No.
know about that.
No, I know. It's like
That's
it's
why we
weird
try to talk about it.
Yeah, we talk about it because it can happen, and people
Right.
don't realize that.
Yeah.
And I think it's so good for the family, everyone involved. There's something about seeing
There's a finality
a dead
to it.
body. Yeah, when you're with it long enough, with that person long enough, you see that there's no one there.
Yeah, they're not there.
And but when you go from seeing them alive and then you see them in a casket at the mortuary, it's like, wait a minute.
How did
what
they get
happened?
there?
Yeah, what happened? I didn't even get to say goodbye. It's I think it's much more personal and meaningful, and I think it's healthy to do it that way.
Now, do you two have plans for when you die? Have
I want to be cremated.
I haven't decided yet. I don't want to be cremated, though.
Why
I
don't
like
you
the
wanna be
idea of being
cremated?
up in those pods. They have these new
Oh,
the
forests.
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought you were
you're-
talking about those storage units.
Yeah, that would be a very cost-effective way of doing it. I don't think it would be legal.
What do
though.
you mean by
Yeah.
pods?
They have these forests where what they do is they put your body in this pod, and I think they put like a seedling or a little sapling
okay.
or whatever they're called.
So you're
on top of
fertilizing
it. So
the new
you're fertilizing
new
the new
growth.
growth.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that's what I would like to do. But I just don't like. I mean, I'm not going to be there, but I don't like the idea of being burned. So that's why I'm not being cremated.
See, I want to be
See,
made
it's
into a
so
diamond,
weird.
and
Oh yeah, so
you can't make me into a
So
diamond
diamond
unless
is
Unless
I
you're
like-
carbon.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
They're so pretty too, and I would.
And there's this whole industry now that's sprung up around cremains, which are the ashes of the
Right.
cremated, and they turn them into diamonds and all sorts of glassware and
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff.
I've always thought it's a waste of real estate having all these burial plots, though.
It is.
Right, I know.
It's a long-term investment there.
Yeah, it
It
is.
is. For some of the cemeteries, though, it was only a 100-year investment.
Oh, is that it? They
Some
can-
of them. And they could come and, dig you up and sell that to somebody else.
Really?
Yeah, in some of them. In the U.S.,
I
I don't
didn't
think it
realize
was like
that.
that in Europe. But, yeah, so there's all sorts of funny little things you need to make sure
There's
that
your
it's...
book.
Yeah,
All these funny
weird funeral little things.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
There's some funky little things
Yeah.
that
When I was a
people
little
don't know
girl,
about.
the book I kept on my nightstand like every night, it literally is this thick. It's called Funeral Customs Around the World. And when I was little, that's what I would look at night before I'd go to bed, and it had some freaky stuff in it. I should show it to
there's
you
some
because we
interesting
could get some
stuff
good
out
book
there.
ideas.
Yeah.
You must have had nightmares. No, you
No,
wouldn't. Not,
I didn't.
not in your family.
Not
You wouldn't do
Tammy.
that. Well, what else would you like our folks at home to know about death?
Oh gosh.
There's
There's
so
much.
much.
And what they need to consider when they're
I
with
would
their
I
own
would
death.
say just to make sure their paperwork is in order
Mm-hmm.
and not to have the death amnesia, like it's not going to happen to me. It will happen to you.
That's your term, the death amnesia.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. It'll happen to you, and you need to be prepared, and you need to prepare for your family because
Yeah.
they're not going to necessarily know what you want,
And they're not coming with you.
and they're not coming with you. Exactly.
And people
Yeah.
our age need to talk with their parents about
What
this
they
sort
want,
of thing.
yes.
Bring it up, the conversation.
Exactly.
And events like Before I Die or Death Cafe or that kind of thing are a perfect place to do it or to get ideas on how to do that. But
Exactly.
it's conversation. Just it needs to be talked about.
Well, I really have enjoyed this conversation tonight. It's time for
We
us
have
to
too.
go. Well, thanks for being with us. I'm Sid Marsh. This is Inside View. See you next time.